Thank you all very much for being out here. This is very exciting. What a great crowd. What a great privilege to be back on the square, to be with so many people that have been supporters and so many new folks to come out and meet me and Maria and to hear my heart for why it is that I'm doing this. Very unlikely thing for me to be doing, running for governor, in the sense that I've never run for office and never worked for the government before. So when people talk about being an outsider, I'm a complete outsider. Let me introduce my wife, Maria, right here. Raise your hand, Maria, so everybody see you. She is God's gift to me, for sure. And she has gone tens of thousands of miles with me in that old RV. It might look nice on the outside. It's 14 years old, but we have had a remarkable journey for the last 14, 15 months traveling this state. I'll give you a little brief biography about me and then talk a little bit more about what I'm passionate about. I grew up in Williamson County on a cattle farm. My wife and I still live there today. My grandfather lived there. My grandson lives there. My family's deeply involved. We raise Hereford cattle, livestock producers. We're deeply involved in the ag industry and have been for decades. Agriculture is 30% of the, agriculture is 13% of the economy of this state. Significant part of the economy of Tennessee. But we give it very little focus in our education system and our economic development approaches. Ag is a critically important part of the future of the state of Tennessee, and as governor, I will make certain that we put the emphasis that is required. Because that's my background, is agriculture. It's important to me, and it ought to be important to the next governor. I'm a cattleman, I'm a businessman. I run a company called Lee Company that many of you people are familiar with, probably have customers here, and we have a lot of employees in this very community. Lee Company is a heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical business. We employ 1,200 people, mostly skilled tradespeople. I am a master plumber myself and got an engineering degree and now run a company of skilled tradespeople. We have neglected and ignored vocational and technical agriculture education for way too long in our public school system. For way too long, for decades, we've left it out of our public school system. And now we're bearing the brunt of that. And I know that as well as anybody. A lot of people talk about vocational education. I've been living it my whole adult life as an employer of skilled tradespeople. Gifted, talented folks. And for right now, in our public school system, for the 4 out of 10 kids that don't go to college, we do virtually nothing to prepare them for success. And yet, we need to change that. So Lee Company was chosen by the Tennessean as the best company to work for in Nashville last year. And yet, we can't fill the skilled trade job openings we have because of this neglect for the skilled trades. When I'm governor, high school's going to look different. And we're going to have opportunities. We're going to have pathways of success for the kids in our school systems that are gifted and talented and that deserve to have a hope for a skill, for a career that they can support their families well. So I'm a cattle farmer and a businessman, and I share a part of my life story everywhere I go because it's so important to who I am as a person. My first wife was killed when I was 40 years old in an accident on my farm. And I had 4 little kids, and I was in the middle of my career, and it turned my life totally upside down. And I had a series of events that compiled to turn my life upside down. But you know what? The Lord used that season of my life in the most profound way. And God walked alongside me through those events and changed my perspective forever about how to raise my kids, single parented them for 8 years, about how to run my company, about how to spend the rest of my life, in fact. And it changed my perspective on my time and my resources and what to do with it. It caused me to get involved in mission work with my kids and get involved with nonprofit work in my community, because I learned in that season of life that there are very few things that matter to Bill Lee. And I want to be about those things. And I started doing some work that ultimately led to this decision. I want to share 2 stories that I share everywhere I go that really contributed to this decision of mine to run for governor. I chaired the YMCA of Middle Tennessee, big nonprofit, one of the largest nonprofits in the state. We have a program called YCAP, It's an at-risk inner-city youth program. And I met a little kid in the inner city one day at a YCAP lunch, and my conversations with him made me feel compelled to invest in his life. So I started driving into one of the worst neighborhoods in downtown Nashville once a week, every week, and spending the evening with this kid. And he, by the way, was failing every class in his school. And I had him moved from one public school to another, a public charter actually. And his educational trajectory completely changed, which means that his future completely changed. And I saw the future in the life of one child absolutely opened up because of a quality education. And I realized how critically important it is in our state. I loved watching what happened to Adam, but I was most concerned about the tens of thousands of our children that are sitting in poor performing schools all across this state. And that, you know, Tennessee's in the bottom half of schools, of states in the nation, in how we perform in our schools. We're in the bottom half of states in America. Our kids deserve better than that. And they deserve a leader who's willing to challenge the status quo in education and bring about real change in our public school system. So because of that work in nonprofit, I got very involved in education issues. I had another experience similar, happened at the same time. I got involved in a prison ministry called Men of Valor, and it's a re-entry program. And because of my involvement in that program, I decided to mentor a man that was coming out of prison. And I spent one morning a week, every week, with him. And I watched that man's life dramatically changed because of the power of a good re-entry program that's significantly different than the re-entry program we have in Department of Corrections in the state of Tennessee. And you know, why that really matters to all of us, think about this. 95% of the people that are in jail and prison in the state of Tennessee right now, 95% of them will serve their term and come out. They're all coming out. And they come out into our communities. And right now, 50% of those people will recommit a crime in our communities and go right back to prison within the first 2 years of being out. Now, and when they go back to prison, by the way, they become more hardened. Their children have a 70% chance of going to prison. That revolving door of recidivism and the elevation in crime as that happens in this state is something that has to be stopped. Because I'm a guy who believes, I've traveled all across this state. I think people want a good job, a good school for their kid, and a safe neighborhood. And we talked about schools, we're in the bottom half of states. Our schools need to be better. Crime, in the 6 largest cities in the state of Tennessee, our violent crime rate went up last year over the year before. You may not realize that we have a violent crime rate problem, but we do, rising in this state. And if we don't do something different about the way we re-enter folks, that number is just going to continue to climb. And I know we can do better because the organization I was working with has a 15% recidivism rate. I said people want a good job, good schools for the kids, safe neighborhoods. You know, a lot of people have good jobs in this state, but we have 15 counties in poverty as designated by the federal government. And guess what? Every one of those counties is in rural Tennessee. And I am a product of rural Tennessee. And if the next governor doesn't do something distinctly different, we're going to lose a way of life in rural Tennessee because our big cities are doing well, but our small towns and our rural communities are struggling. And we have to put a stop to that, and we have to do something different. That's why I took a tractor to bring awareness to the problem of rural Tennessee. Maria and I did a tractor tour. We drove a tractor from Mountain City, took it off my farm, hauled it up to Mountain City, and then drove it 758 miles to Memphis, right through small towns all across the way to bring awareness to what I think is a real problem in this state. Anyway, I became involved in things that I believed that significantly needed to change in this state. And I was a regular guy, businessman, cattle farmer, father, grandfather, husband, who decided, you know, when the founding fathers envisioned this nation, they left a country that had a ruling class, and they founded a country based on the concept of self-governance, where regular people like you and me, who want to impact their communities and their state, engage in the public square and change the things that need to be changed. And I felt compelled to do that. So Maria and I prayed for... Maria and I went into that year on January 1st and prayed every single day. I said, I'm going to pray every day this year, and I suspect by the end of the year I'll know. And we did, and we knew by the end of the year, and we announced. And last April, we officially announced a campaign, and we took off in that bus. We started off in our home county. We went to one of the smallest and poorest counties in Tennessee to start off our campaign for governor. We went to Van Buren. Because I never want to forget that every single person that lives in the state needs to have access to a good job and a good school and a safe neighborhood. And we went to Van Buren County first, and then we went to 95 counties in 95 days, which sounded like a really good idea when we started. Turned out to be a good idea because we met the most remarkable people in the most remarkable state. And yet we do have some very remarkable challenges in this state that need to be addressed. And I think the status quo needs to be challenged. It needs to be broken. It needs to be addressed. And it needs to be done with strong leadership that understands, because of living in rural Tennessee, because of working with skilled tradespeople, because of having experience in the inner city with poor schools, understands some of the challenges we face. And believes that we need to bring about real change there. I'll tell you one last thing we did on the campaign, then we'll get to questions. We did an RV tour, we did a tractor tour. This is a town hall tour. We're doing 70 town halls like this, which has been so thrilling for us. And we did a Faith in Tennessee tour. I'm a man whose faith in Christ is the most important thing in my life, and that'll never change. I'm also a man who believes that the voice of faithful people in this country has been made to feel increasingly unwelcome, especially in the public square. And that is a terrible mistake, because faith and family and community, those are not old-fashioned values that got us here. Those are critically important values to go to where we want to be in the state of Tennessee. And religious liberty is critically important right of ours that needs to be defended, and it needs to be spoken out for. And so we did this Faith in Tennessee tour. We went to 35 faith-based nonprofits all across the state. Also, not just because I believe that religious liberty is so important, but because I think I'm a conservative. Government is not the answer to the challenges that we face in the state. Oftentimes, government's the problem. The answer lies in the people in the community. The answer lies in we, the people, our private sector, our nonprofit communities, our faith communities, our churches, the people that are out. So we visited 35 faith-based nonprofits that are doing the work of serving children with disabilities, serving men in prison, serving women health clinics, children working through DCS. We went to faith-based nonprofits all across the state that are doing the work that government cannot and should not do. And government, at the very least, should not make it more difficult for them to do what they do. And we asked those nonprofit leaders, does state government hinder or help in your ability to do this? And more often than not, it was hinder. And that is just the opposite of what it ought to be, folks. So I believe in the power of public-private nonprofit partnerships as the solution to many of our challenges. Because I'm fiscally conservative. I do not think we ought to be growing government. I do not think we need to expand government. I'm a limited government guy who believes that government's role is to protect and defend our rights and our freedoms and our privileges. Rights like the First Amendment, religious liberty, the Second Amendment, critically important. The 10th Amendment, we've lost our way there. Government exists to protect and defend those rights and freedoms, but not to involve itself in running our businesses and running our farms and running our everyday lives and telling us what we can and cannot do. So I'll get to your questions, and that'll answer a lot of what my philosophical beliefs are, but those things I'm most passionate about. I'll close with this. We're 6 days away from early voting, 3 weeks away from a primary, and we're going to pick the next governor of the state of Tennessee. And that governor decision is going to change the trajectory of this state for at least 8 years, and the trajectory will be changed deep into the future. It matters significantly who leads this state. And I want to tell you two things about me that I think are critically important when you consider, as you consider me as someone you might be willing to support and vote for. We have a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and an executive branch of government. Those are really different branches. They have really different skill sets, really different leadership styles. The executive branch of government needs an executive leader in the top of that. And God's blessed me with a life of executive leadership, of running a $250 million corporation, of running one of the largest nonprofits in the state, of running one of the largest construction industry organizations in the state. And a life of executive leadership that I believe has equipped me to be able to address the challenges, challenge the status quo, make difficult business type decisions the way we do in business, but apply that same decision-making process and status quo breaking in state government. And I'll tell you one other thing I think is important. I'm the only person in this race who's running as an outsider. People say they're outsider, but there's only one person in the governor's race who hasn't run for office and who hasn't worked for the government for years. And I would submit to you that there is power in an outsider coming into a system of government. It's what our founders envisioned with this idea of self-governance, of people coming from outside. It's exactly why we have a president who is so incredibly effective at what he's doing, is because he is not a politician. He is a businessman who came from outside government. He's willing to challenge the status quo because he cares more about America than he does about his political career, because he doesn't have a political career. It's critically important that we think about that, even as we pick our next governor. I think it's valuable to have a leader in the state capitol who doesn't have years of relationships with donors that they are beholden to. I think it's really important that we have a leader who doesn't have years of relationships with lobbyists that have power and influence in state capitol. I think it's very important because career politicians that have been in office for a long time, we all know this, not disparaging the person, but the system creates people with power and influence. And that comes at the expense of the influence of the people they serve. That's how they accumulate that power and influence. I really believe that. And government exists to serve the people, not to serve the people that are inside government. And the way we prevent that is from having outsiders come in at the highest level of government and make certain that we bring about the fresh ideas and the new changes that we need. I think the most powerful form of leadership is servant leadership, and I'd be absolutely honored to serve every single one of you as the next governor of this state, as the person who can lead Tennessee and make her not only a better place for 6.5 million people, but I truly believe Tennessee can lead the nation. And Lord knows this nation needs some states to lead. And we can do that in this state with the right leadership, and I'd be honored to serve you as that leader. Thank you very much for being here today. Now we're going to answer questions.
All right, well, we'll give us some questions. If you have not had a chance to, once again, thank you for being here. And if you would like to ask a question, there are some white paper over here. If you will write them down, put them up here, and we'll go through those as we can. Once again, we'll just talk about the questions that we have written. I would like to recognize Mayor Gary Cordell. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Senator James Bowling. I always appreciate
Very honored that you all would both be here today. Thank you.
So our first question, sir, what is your stand on immigration and the sanctuary cities that are in Tennessee now?
So we should never have sanctuary cities in Tennessee, and here's why. That I'm a person who believes that we are a nation that is built on the rule of law, and we have to follow the law. And by very definition, a sanctuary city is lawlessness. That's what its definition is, and therefore we should never have them. And further, politicians in Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, have failed us in immigration policy in this country for decades. We have a failed immigration policy because politicians have failed to address it. We finally have a president who is willing to address it, who's willing to secure our border and to stop the flow. We can make illegal immigration, the problem of illegal immigration, worse in our state by instituting policies that make Tennessee attractive. Driver's licenses, in-state tuition, sanctuary cities. Those are policies that make Tennessee an attractive place for illegal immigrants, and I would be against those policies.
So earlier you referenced the Second Amendment. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment?
You know, I think it's fundamental and guaranteed that we have the right to bear arms, and we should never relent when there is an attempt to infringe on that right. And there is a lot of political pressure to, whenever there's a tragic event, that we all have a great deal of sympathy for the tragedy and the people involved in those tragedies, but that creates this real political pressure to do something. There's one thing we should not ever do, and that is to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens because of the actions of criminals. And therefore, we should continue to defend the right and the privilege to bear arms and to not allow any circumstances to infringe upon that right. Thank you.
Okay, so you talked about a lot. You talked about a man of faith. You talked about being a father, a farmer. Those are Tennessee values. So it's easy for us to support Tennessee values. But as soon as your hand comes off that Bible, our values will be attacked by organizations that will test your mettle.
That's right.
So an example, the Thomas More Law, Senator filed an appeal in our lawsuit to stop refugee placement, a program from which Tennessee withdrew. What, sir, will you do to fight for Tennessee values? And how will you, as the chief executive of our state, assert our 10th Amendment rights as a sovereign state?
Yep. That question kind of explains how I feel on a lot of those ways. I think we've lost our way on the 10th Amendment. I think that our founders never envisioned a situation where we would have 40% of our state budget be federally funding, would be attached to federal funding. That means we're attached to with a lot of strings attached to the funds that come from federal government. Important to remember, most all of that money is our money that we send to the federal government, and then they return to us with strings attached. But we have to recognize the sovereignty of states, and we have to have a leader at the head of a state that recognizes and pushes for and defends that 10th Amendment and our ability to push back on federally mandated issues like refugee resettlement in a state if we don't want refugee resettlement the way the federal government is laying it out and pushing it towards us. There would be a number of things that federal government has tried to impose on this state, be it Common Core, be it this issue of resettlement, whatever it is that the federal government is trying to impose on our state that we as Tennesseans do not believe is in the best interest of Tennessee, then we need to have a leader who's willing to push back and defend our 10th Amendment rights and the sovereignty of Tennessee.
Thank you. In recent history, the removal of Confederate monuments has been something that has become prevalent around this area. We'd like to hear your stance on keeping our Southern history and the stopping of the removal of Confederate monuments.
I was looking for one. Is there one in the square? In my hometown, in my home square, there is. And I think that removing history, wiping out history, whitewashing history is a bad idea. I think that there are parts of our history that we celebrate and are proud of because it's who we are and where we came from and what has made this country great. And there are parts of our history that none of us are proud of and wish hadn't happened. But wiping out history is a terrible idea, good or bad, because we learn from the good in our history, we learn from the bad in our history. Removing monuments removes so much of our heritage and so much of our background and so much of our understanding. We should never do it.
Someone has stated, we just want to thank you for not getting negative in your ads. Would you care to address the negative ads that were being run against you?
Yeah.
And a follow-up, if you have any comments on Diane Black's current advertisement targeting your campaign and past Democratic funding?
Yeah. I do have a few comments about that. One of the things I would say just broadly is that I think negative attack ads are everything that's wrong with politics. I'm not going to go down that road. It's not who I am. It's not what I think leaders do. I actually think that you can tell an awful lot of truth about the person behind an ad more than you can about the person in the ad. And the truth is, we all know, I think Tennesseans see right through it. Deceptive ads. You know, I'm the most conservative candidate in this race, so you would expect there to be ads that try to make me out to be not a conservative. I'm also a businessman who makes decisions about his business, not considering every little move politically that it might mean to my next campaign, because I'm not a politician. That's how politicians think. Business people think otherwise. Remember when Donald Trump got criticized for making contributions to that weren't aligned with what people thought they were? It's because he's a businessman too, and he knows that that's what sometimes you do. I absolutely, I'll say this just to be clear. I don't brag about this, but while this all gets brought up, I've made $160,000 worth of contributions in my life toward political campaigns. 99.3% of them have been to Republicans. I am a conservative, and I've had a lifelong history of being a conservative. And because I'm the most conservative person in this race, that is what the deceptive attack ads will be, is to try to convince you otherwise.
How will you approach immigration for Tennessee? You've touched on this a little bit, but your view on the immigration policy and the overall issue, and how will you approach it in Tennessee?
Yeah, my approach is going to be not to make what is already a bad problem worse. And I've said this before, but I'll just briefly state it again. I think because of Washington, D.C. politics and the back and forth of that, we've not addressed this problem. We finally have a president who will. We will have secure borders because he'll force that issue. We can make it either better or worse for Tennessee. And the way we make it worse is it's about policies. It's not about people, it's about policy. The way we make it worse is we advocate for policies that make Tennessee attractive. The way we, as a state, make it a better situation is we stand against those policies, and I'll be clear to stand against policies that make that problem worse in this state. Those policies include driver's license, in-state tuition, sanctuary cities, and any other policy that comes up that makes this an attractive place for illegal aliens.
You mentioned earlier, you talked about education.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about career and technical education, which I'm a big supporter. What will the role of public education as opposed to charter schools? Can you see, what's your view on that? How will that go?
Yeah, so we've talked about vocational side. You're talking about the more traditional side, charters
Versus public education.
Yeah, here's what I think. I don't think it's actually charters versus public education. I'm a guy whose children were homeschooled and went to public school and went to private school. And I mentor a little kid in the inner city who goes to a public charter school. So I don't think that it's the type of school that we have to choose from that's going to be the right choice. I think it's the quality of education for our children. And I actually think that when parents have choices, it does elevate the whole system. The reason my little Adam in the inner city had a better outcome is because he had a choice of going to this poor performing school or another school that was a better performing school. And when he got to make that choice, his outcome was improved. I think when parents have choices, not only are their children's outcomes improved, but the whole system is improved. I talked to somebody about that this morning. They were concerned about if we advocate for charter schools, then what's it going to do to the rest of the schools? Here's how I view that. I'm not nearly afraid of what's going to happen to this if we do that. You know what I'm afraid of? Doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 25 years and getting the same results we have now. We have got to challenge the status quo. And in education, listen, the vast majority of our kids are going to go to traditional public schools. So why don't we use charter schools and pilot voucher programs and alternative types of schools and watch what it is they're doing that has better outcomes and learn those best practices and apply them to the public school system. It's not an either or. It is allow this to take place, find out why it's working. Why does the charter school that my little kid goes to in the inner city have 100% graduation rate and acceptance into post-secondary, and his adjacent school had 5%? Why is that? Now, so I can go on about that. Here's what I think. We can improve our public school system. We can improve our traditional public school system, and we can do that at the same time offering choice, because it allows us to understand just how it is that we improve the entire system. And I'm sold out committed to having better schools across the state of Tennessee. That includes, and there's 2 or 3 key points to that, includes changing our curriculum and making sure it's got Tennessee-based curriculum that our teachers and our parents decide. It's bringing back civics education and character education into our public school system. It's creating an environment where teachers can teach and do what they do. We support teachers. We need to support them in a greater way and not just pay. Teachers don't do this just for the pay. They do it because they love students and they love changing kids' lives. And the way we prohibit that is by creating an environment, for example, of over-testing and testing for the wrong thing, and creating an environment where teachers can't do what we know they can do. So we got to overhaul it, and we can use choices to make those changes.
Thanks, sir. As a public educator, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have one more question for you. You referenced in your intro, the next governor of Tennessee will make decisions that will impact the state 8 years and then on.
Right.
So what is your vision for the state of Tennessee?
You know, I go back to, I am a business guy, and we go off every year in our company and we do strategic planning. We leave off site and we go for 3 or 4 days, and when we do that strategic planning, we talk about what do we want Lee Company to look like 10 years from now or 15 years from now. We'll do that. We'll say, where do we think we ought to be 10 years from now? And then we back up and say, what are we going to do this year? The 1 or 2 things that we're going to do this year that complements that 10-year strategic plan. So when I'm governor, I'm not going to think about what I can do in the next 4 years or even what I can do in the next 8 years. I'm going to say, what does Tennessee need to look like in 25 years? And how do we set this state on a course to lead the country? Maybe in 25 years, maybe sooner. And so I simplify it to these 3 things. If we, number 1, defend the principles and the values that we've talked about, we can never compromise on those. Defending rights that are already guaranteed and exist. We're not going to go get those. Those are ours. We just have to defend them. That's something that is not something we're going to go do. That is just something that we already have, those rights and privileges and freedoms. We just have to defend them against those who want to erode them. But what we want to do is provide a state that gives people access to a good job, good schools for their kids, safe neighborhoods. Can we lead the country in education? Can we be in the top 10 states in America in education instead of in the bottom 50, bottom 25? I believe that we can. Our kids are just as smart as anybody else. We just need to have a system that does that. Can we take 15 counties in poverty in rural Tennessee and remove the status of being poverty counties? We absolutely can do that, especially if we transform a workforce by reintroducing skilled workforce into our public school system. And can we be one of the safest states in the country? Safe neighborhoods? Absolutely we can do that. But we can't do it by doing the same way we've been doing it in the Department of Corrections for the past 20 years. We have to be willing to implement brand new, bold, creative thinking and break the challenge the status quo. Can we be a leader in America in those 3 things that matter to every single person in this state? Absolutely we can do that. We absolutely can do that. And that is my vision for Tennessee.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any last words?
Yeah, I'll give a couple last words. First of all, thanks again. If you're running for governor, this is exactly what you hope for. You show up and people come. Y'all have been very gracious, and thank you for your time. You have a real important decision to make. It's choosing that governor. I've already talked about that. And most of you are here because you're engaged, you care, and you know what's happening in this gubernatorial campaign. And you know that where Bill Lee was kind of an unknown, distant third just a couple of months ago, the headlines in the papers are Bill Lee's campaign is surging, and the polls are closing, and we're within 5 points of the leader. Which, by the way, is why you see attack ads. When people begin to feel the power slipping away, they begin to attack. We're closing that gap at a very rapid pace. We're going to win this election. And the reason we're going to win it is because I believe that people believe the message that we, the people, are the ones that should be in office, that we should be in power. And that we should, not power, but that we should just determine our own destiny. And I believe, too, the reason that we're going to win is because people hear this message and then they leave town halls like this, 70 of them that we're doing, and they engage. They realize that we have 6 days to early voting, that we have 3 weeks to an election, and they decide that, you know what, this is a very close race, and that my involvement can change the course of Tennessee. If I go recruit 10 or 15 or 20 people in a race that has 3 contenders that are all right there neck and neck, if I go out and engage in my community, then I can win this county for Bill Lee. And if I do that, and if we do that all across Tennessee, we're going to have a decisive victory in just about 3 weeks. So I would invite you to, by the way, I just got to say this. I had lunch with Kentucky Governor Bevin, remarkable conservative outsider who came from outside and beat 2 well-established candidates right at the last minute. And he won the Kentucky primary Republican primary election by 83 votes, a statewide election. So the people sitting right here are the key to my victory. And I would encourage you to engage. You really have no idea the power that you have to go out and recruit 10, 15, 20, send your emails. Please take a yard sign. Just swipe your credit card for a $10 donation to fill up that gas guzzling RV over there and to put more television commercials on the air. Engage. I would welcome your engagement because I'm increasingly inspired about the opportunity to serve you and your children and your grandchildren as we make Tennessee a leader in America. Thank you. Oh, yeah, there we go. Do we have enough? Yeah. Good. I put out a book called This Road I'm On. Has not one word in here about running for governor or politics. That's not at all what this is about. I started to write this book a few years ago before anybody knew who I was, and I thought, well, that'd be a big waste because nobody will read it. Well, now, run for governor, so I thought maybe they'll read it. And this story is just about my life. It's about growing up in rural Tennessee and about some of the tragedies and challenges and richness of my life and how God has walked alongside me on this road that I'm on throughout the whole way. And we're all on a road, and we're all in either good or bad or challenging or wonderful places. Life is bittersweet, but I hope that take one of these. We have one for everybody. I hope that you will take it strictly in hopes that this is not about my campaign. This is about hopes that it will encourage you in your life wherever you are on your road. And read it and pass it along. It'd be an honor for you to have it. Thank you again for coming out today. Really grateful.